Hey guys, this is Zac Allen, and this is the start of my series on Ecclesiastes. Now, Ecclesiastes is actually one of my favorite books of the Bible, which is a little bit weird since a lot of people haven't read through it very much. However, I'm looking forward to explaining why I like it so much over the next few weeks. However, before we get into the actual book, let's break down the context. Who wrote it, why, and who did they write it to? Now, Ecclesiastes 1:1 starts with a general idea of who the author is. It says that these are the words of the preacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. And later on it says that he's also the king over all of Israel in 1 verse 12. It says that he's been the king of Israel in Jerusalem. Now with these, and with those qualifications, he's trying to establish why he's trustworthy. He's saying, I'm all these things, you should trust me. It's credentialing. It's the same reason why you might trust someone more if you're writing like an academic study, like a scientific study. You might trust someone more if you find out that they're a doctor. But these can also be used to figure out who wrote Ecclesiastes. With these qualifications and tradition, it's likely that Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes at the end of his life. The traditional view is that Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes at the end of his life after he became disillusioned with pleasure. It also makes sense off his qualifications. It says that he's the son of David, and that he was the king in Jerusalem over all of Israel. Now, after Solomon, Israel actually split in two, where the northern half was called Israel, and its capital was Samaria, and the bottom half was called Judah, and its capital was Jerusalem. Therefore, after Solomon, it would have been impossible for someone to rule the southern kingdom in Jerusalem, yet be ruler over the northern kingdom, Israel. But he says he ruled over Israel and in Jerusalem. It is possible that he's using this as hyperbole a little bit to kind of say, hey, I've ruled over everything. Technically it was just Judah, but it was everything. It seems more likely, though, for the kings at the time period to want to distance themselves from the other nation. Someone in Judah would have said, yeah, I'm from Israel. And someone from Israel would have said, yeah, I'm from Judah. They just wouldn't do that because there was quite a bit of rivalry between the two nations. Therefore, it's likely that he is Solomon. He's the son of David, which, he could only be someone after David. And it couldn't be after Solomon because after that, he couldn't be king in Jerusalem and Israel. Now, if it is Solomon, why did he write it? Well, as I said earlier, tradition dictates that Solomon likely wrote this at the end of his life. We know from the Bible that he became very hedonistic. He just simply chased after pleasure. He wanted only pleasure in his life. Now, the traditional view is that after he was done chasing pleasure, he reconciled himself with God. And then he wrote Ecclesiastes because of his disillusionment. Ecclesiastes comes out strong against things like pleasure. It says that these are just meaningless, which makes sense for someone who had chased after pleasure for so long and yet got nothing from it. It would make sense for that person to then say, yeah, this is just all meaningless. So, with the context, or with the author decided, who's it written to? It was likely written to the people of Israel. Again, he was still king at this time because he identifies himself as the king. So therefore, he's likely writing this to the people of Israel, to all of Israel, to kind of disseminate his views among them to show why he believes pleasure is just meaningless. With that, let's go into the actual content of the scripture. So, Ecclesiastes 1. It starts off with saying that these are the words of the preacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem. That's Ecclesiastes 1:1. Now, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but these are meant to give credentials, why you should trust the author. Ecclesiastes 2. Meaningless, meaningless, says the preacher. Meaningless, meaningless. All is meaningless. By the way, I'm choosing to use the NASB version, or sorry, an NIV version. Other translations use the word vanity, such as ESV, and if I remember correctly, Holman also used vanity. Vanity doesn't really translate as well to our current language, so as well as something like meaningless does. NIV will, in general, give actually an arguably better version for this specific book, this specific chapter. I'm not saying always, but this specific book, this specific chapter, NIV is probably going to be a little bit better. So, Ecclesiastes 2, he's simply saying everything is meaningless, which is a bit of a broad stroke. I will say, bit of a spoiler for later, but he doesn't truly believe everything is meaningless. Absolutely everything is meaningless. Nothing has meaning. Do whatever you want. He doesn't actually believe that. He's making a generalized statement to shift your perspective. Because we naturally want to assume, oh, everything's meaningful. We need to think about the meaning behind everything. He's saying, that's really not true, guys. Everything's meaningless. It's meant to shift your perspective. It's meant for you to pause and say, wait a second. Is everything meaningless? Now, we'll go on to Ecclesiastes 3. And this is the entire third paragraph. All the way to, well, further down. Oh yeah, all the way down to verse 11. Now, he starts off with saying, what do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? This is essentially Solomon saying there's not really a reason for people to work. Just think about it. You, what have you gained from what you work? Ultimately, everything goes away, right? Later on, Jesus says that when we die, we just leave nothing. I mean, it's a bit of simplification. But we don't even go into heaven with clothes on our backs. So why does anything that you work for actually matter? Now, yes, there are reasons why it does matter. But think about that for a second. When you die, nothing that you make will be brought with you. And none of it will actually matter. So why does it matter now? Ecclesiastes 4. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. In some ways, I actually prefer the NASB version of this verse. A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Also, the sun rises and the sun sets, and hurrying to its place, it rises there again. But I will be using the NIV. So, verse 4. Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. Nothing ever changes. Everything's the same. As he says later on, that which has been is that which will be. Nothing changes. I mean, think about it. Has anything really changed in the last... Actually, COVID is bit of a come up with a bit of a wrench in things. But even then, life hasn't truly changed. The earth hasn't changed. He then says, the sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The sun doesn't change. Just time doesn't change. It keeps on going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Rises and sets, rises and sets. And it goes back to where it started. Rises, goes back, and then goes back to where it was. Rises, sets, goes back to where it was. Rises, sets, go back to where it was. And it constantly does that. It never stops. Time is just the same, always. None of it ever changes. The wind blows to the south, then turns to the north, then round and round it goes, ever turning on its course. He's saying, first of all, that the wind is unknowable. We can't know where the wind's going. And on top of that, it just kind of keeps on doing the same thing. The wind never really changes. Yeah, it may change direction, but it just eventually returns to its course. It doesn't really change. This is another thing that just doesn't change. Nothing changes. He says, all streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they will return again. The river's toil is meaningless in the first half. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. What these rivers are trying to do, fill up the sea, it's kind of meaningless. It's going to end up the same. The river's work is never finished, and it will never be finished. It just doesn't mean anything that the rivers are flowing to the sea, because the sea never fills. And then to the place the streams come from, there they return again. This work that the streams does is meaningless because it just recycles and it goes back. We know that, streams go into the sea gets evaporated, and then rain brings water back into the rivers go back into the sea evaporates, and it keeps on going in a cycle, and it's cyclical. It just goes back and forth, forever and always. It never changes. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. Verse 8. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear has its fill of hearing. Everything is tiring. I mean, all things are wearisome. You can't even really talk about all the reasons why everything is wearisome and tiring. Just, it's tiring. Life is draining. The eye never has enough of seeing, or the ear is filled of its hearing. We're never satisfied. Things are never satisfied. Humans are never satisfied. I can see as much as I want, and I'm still able to see more. I still want to see more. I can hear all I want to hear, and yet I still want to hear more. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. Things are cyclical. There is nothing new under the sun. Everything which has been is that which will be. How many times have you been all like, wait, this is just something that's been rebranded from my childhood. This is something just like what I did in my childhood, but it's being portrayed as something new. Nothing really changes. Everything's the same. There's nothing new under the sun, which has not been before. I mean, even ideas. Every single idea, every single invention is just building on what has been there before. Is that really something new? It's really not. It's just building on a prior existing thing. Everything is old. Nothing is new. Is there anything of which one might say, look, this is new. It was here already, long ago. It was here before our time. Exactly. Nothing ever changes. Everything's just the same. It may change a tiny little bit. Everything's the same, basically. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. Who of us knows our great-great-great-grandfather? Knows in intimate detail what they did, besides maybe their name on the family tree? Maybe one or two small heirlooms passed down through the generations? We don't know them. Of the former generations, the people who were here before us, we don't know them. And that applies to us too. The future generations will not know us. In 200 years, 300 years, no one will know who you were. No one will know who I was, except for maybe just a small name on a family tree. My future wife, or your current wife, or mother, or father, these people that mean so much to you, and even yourself, will just be forgotten. They won't be remembered. Verse 12, I, the teacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. Yet again, giving his credentials. Because he understands that this is hard. He understands that this is a hard subject. And there's a temptation to even just say, I'm just going to reject this. He's saying, no, don't reject it. I'm the teacher. I'm wise. I've been king. You should listen to me. Please listen to me. And then he continues with that. Apply my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. He's continuing to say, not only am I king, but I've also studied. I've applied my mind to study. And then he finishes verse 13 with, what a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. It is a heavy burden. Things like philosophy and wisdom are hard. It's a heavy burden that God's given us. And only humans are capable of contemplating their existence. A dog doesn't sit there saying, what if I don't exist? Only humans do that kind of stuff. Only humans can dedicate their minds to exploring wisdom and to studying. And it's a burden that God has given only us. He's given us this terrible burden, this heavy burden. Verse 14, I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless and chasing after the wind. He's restating himself from verse 2. Everything that's done under the sun, all of it is meaningless and chasing after the wind. He uses, instead of just saying meaningless, all is meaningless, he uses the chasing after the wind. How many of us, when we were kids, or seen other kids, just, run after the wind, wind comes in, wind is blowing, and then the kids are like, oh, I want to go chase after the wind. Yay! They run for a few minutes, and then they're like, the wind's a lot faster than me. It's kind of meaningless to just chase after the wind. It's a frivolous work that eventually will get absolutely nothing done because you can't chase after the wind. He's saying that doing everything done is like this. Everything done, it's like you're just chasing after the wind. Verse 15, what is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. You can't fix anything. Nothing that you try to fix will be truly fixed. And what is missing can't really be accounted for. There are things that are missing from everything. We all feel some kind of missing element. And the amount of missing elements that there are can't be counted or accounted for. There's too many. It's practically infinite. It can't be accounted for. Verse 16, I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Israel before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. He's saying yet again, I have increased wisdom. I'm the wisest person ever. I've experienced wisdom and knowledge like no one else before me. 17. Then I apply myself to the understanding of wisdom, and also of madness and folly. I learned that this too is chasing after the wind. This studying of wisdom, and even studying things that seem counterintuitive, like madness and folly. All of it is meaningless. Like, yeah, you expect studying madness and folly to be meaningless, but studying wisdom. I mean, there's an entire section in the Bible called wisdom literature, and he's saying that that's meaningless. He's saying that studying that is meaningless. Verse 18 is his reason why. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. The more we know, the more grievous it is. The more we have to confront the issues of the world, the more we have to confront the fact that none of it matters. The more wise that we become, the more we acknowledge our small place in the universe, how nothing that we do will really matter. Our future generations will not know who we were. We will not leave a strong, everlasting impact. With this knowledge, there's a lot of grief. With that note, I'll leave you off. Till next time.